Yes, welcome back to the Magic Sponge podcast, a miracle cure for all your rugby league injury issues. I'm Brien Senni. I'm the guy behind NRL Physio, all the stuff you see on socials. James, I think we're both relatively healthy. Both our households are relatively healthy. It's probably the first week in a long time. How are you, mate? 2 big wins by our teams this week, which is always good.
Very, very excited to be here on a Sunday with you again, Brian. And you're right, 2 stomping victories by the Dolphins. Bit unexpected, the Dolphins, away from sort of, I guess, underdog status there to the Broncos rock and rolling the Raiders at home. 2 pretty good games of footy, those ones actually. So pretty good signs for the Broncos and the Finns, mate. Looking like our grand final prediction's going to come true, I reckon, based on last week.
Yeah, mate. I think people underestimated just how far the geographical boundaries of the expand to, like all the way to Darwin.
Absolutely.
Look, I mean, the haters and the losers thought that the was a bad name. I don't know who would be silly enough to think that, but yeah, look, I do still wish, as Kevy said, they're Redcliffe, mate. That's all I want to hear. Like I've never been more about stuff that Kevy says than when he kept calling us Redcliffe. And I was like, Kevy, I know you're saying this to try and like piss them off, but I'm like, you are giving me life by calling them the Redcliffe Dolphins. This is my dream come true. So that was so good.
Well, when Kevy's giving you marketing advice that's better than the marketing that has happened for thee over the years, I would really, really, really reconsider where that's at, to be honest, Brian.
100%. All right, mate. Well, everyone listening, you know why you're here. We're on YouTube now, so please get on over there, subscribe, give us a review, thumbs up, all that fun stuff. We're definitely still growing on there, which is great. This is your one-stop shop for all things injuries as they go down in the NRL. We'll cover all the in-game injuries, the big injury news, and we loop it all back to SuperCoach Fantasy, all that fun stuff. Head on over to patreon.com/NRL Physio. That's where you get all of the stuff during the week that will help you with your fantasy and supercoach teams get the edge. I mean, I think there's some guys in there who are doing really, really well, guys and girls in there who are doing really, really well with their ranks and picking up on little things here and there that are helping them get the edge over their league mates or climbing up the rankings. I know I'm going to boast, James. I think I'm into like the top 2,000 now. So that just puts me like in elite status. As you know, 2,000 is much better than 3,000, 4,000. It's just such a illustrious position to be in. So into the top 2,000. So I'm an absolute super coach genius. Get on over to patreon.com/NRL Physio to get all the information. But otherwise, let's get into the injuries from round 7.
I don't know exactly what he's done. I would have thought it was an ankle, but I'm just guessing. He shouldn't be out for a long period of time. I mean, I'm no doctor. We have to wait for the scans, obviously, but that'd be more positive than negative.
Round 7, and here we are with the wrap-up, Brian. So to start off, as we always do, the HIAs. The only one out of this week, incredibly only one to talk about, is Daejarn Asi from the Para Eels there. So he should miss 11 days. The only thing that's probably fantasy relevant for that is probably where Blaze Talangi fits into the system there, or whether Para look at wholesale changes and get a different 7 in, I think, Brian. So we probably don't need to talk too much about the HIAs from this week. The only person there, again, is Daejarn Asi. Roosters Storm, no injuries to talk about out of that game, nor the Dragons versus Warriors game. So the first person that we've got on the run sheet here tonight, Brian, is from the Eels-Finns game in that huge win that the Dolphins had in Darwin. Clint Gutherson with the knee concern. I guess there's a lot to talk about here with Gutho because he's had, from what it sounds like in reports, the knee's been drained, which suggests that there's a bit more going on there that he's going to have to manage throughout the year. What do you want to talk to initially about Gutho and the knee concern? Is it problem signs there for the Eels and Gutho, do you think?
Yeah, look, this is probably one that's gone under the radar a little bit because he didn't, miss this week. So that kind of already puts people at ease a little bit. They're like, oh, well, he played, that's not a big deal. And I think the best way I can put it is that knee swelling post-surgery, while it's definitely not ideal, in isolation or on its own, it's probably not all that concerning. It's something that you could put down as a management issue, try and really deload and build it up from there. But when you look at Gutho's history and how that relates to knee swelling post-surgery, big concerns there. I think both in the short term and the long term, because effectively the swelling post-surgery can be from a number of different things. So you can have bleeding from damaged blood vessels, you can have infection, which isn't good, but probably the most common one that we see, particularly around like these meniscus cartilage surgeries, is just irritation to those meniscus, that cartilage, with like adverse loading or increased loading as people are coming back from surgery, which in essence Gutho is, because he had a very, very quiet off season. He was on record as saying, like, I'm feeling fresher than ever. I've been off my legs, and I actually said in the preseason injury profiles that didn't actually fill me with much. It didn't fill me with positivity, because he's a player who relies on so much effort plays, on just never stopping. So for him to kind of be off his feet for that off season, that I kind of thought maybe his lack of prep would mean that he would suffer. And so I was like off him, I think, like a lot of people heading into this season, but mine was sort of mainly around that limited off season. And now we're hearing that he's been dealing with ongoing pain and ongoing fluid. So this isn't just a this week thing. This is something he's been dealing with to start the season. It obviously got to the point it was that bad this week where he couldn't train. So he had to have limited training. He had to have fluid drained from that knee. Now, like, talking about the fluid, because a lot of people ask, what does the fluid mean? Once again, it can be bleeding, just be bleeding from the damaged blood vessels, but it's important for people to know that the knee produces like a natural amount of fluid. It's called synovial fluid that helps effectively preserve the health of the knee. So it lubricates the cartilage of the bone and effectively just nourishes the knee to keep the knee joint healthy. But once you start talking about Gutho, and he's had 2 ACL reconstructions, injuries and reconstructions on that knee. He's also had a meniscus tear, which with last year required surgical repair. So, and worth mentioning with those ACL injuries, very rare to come out of those without some sort of meniscus damage as well. And once again, if you listen to this show, your meniscus is your shock absorber. It's the thing that helps absorb the shock that goes through your knee. So you've got 2 ACL injuries with likely meniscus damage, another meniscus injury last year. So you're just losing shock absorption over and over and over again. This is where we start to talk about osteoarthritis. And we've spoken about it with the likes of Boyd Cordner, James Tedesco in recent times. Jason Taumalolo was the big one to start this year, and how those ongoing knee issues can affect your ability to deal with load. And Taumalolo as a forward, that's a big deal. For someone like Gutho, who relies on his motor, that is also a big deal. So once the meniscus starts to break down, those osteoarthritic changes can just cause an overproduction of that fluid, because the knee health isn't great. So it's trying to almost produce more fluid, more of that synovial fluid, to try and help lubricate the cartilage, to nourish the knee. It's working overtime. So I'll go to some past examples and why I guess this is concerning. And I'm not sitting here saying that Gutho's definitely in all sorts and he's not going to play for 10 weeks or whatever. I think the word I always come back to, and you'll hear me say it time and time again, is volatile. And this situation is so volatile, because I'll give you 2 really pertinent, probably the 2 most recent big examples, and they're both fullbacks, centers in the Gutho mold. And that's Latrell in 2022. So he had some fluid on the knee that needed to be drained. He was obviously fine. Look, he's young. He doesn't have a lot of load that's gone through that knee. There's not a lot of prospects for big damage or issues there. So he was fine, and deals with a bit of PCL issue here and there. But by and large, his knee health, by what we're told, is pretty good. But then you had Greg Inglis in 2019. So, this is as bad as it gets. This is worst case scenario. But in February of 2019, he had reported fluid on the knee that he needed to have drained. And I'm sure he had it, in the previous months as well, or even potentially previous years as well, that we weren't told about. but it was reported in February of 2019, and by April of 2019, he'd retired and look, at the time it was mental health as well, but it was well known that his knee was not in a good place. So I guess the thing to mention there is Greg obviously been dealing with clear osteoarthritis in his knee for a number of years. He was also 32. Gutho's only 29. But I guess, yeah, like also like it now makes me think about all those weird reports. I think it was like last year where they were talking about the Eels were looking for a fullback. They were looking for a fullback and talking about moving Gutho to the centres. And I mean, the reasons given at the time were Gutho wasn't a game-breaking fullback and they wanted some. But now I'm sort of thinking, could the medical staff, see the state of his knee and see that there's those osteoarthritic changes starting to creep in? So do we need to make a plan for the future, take him out of fullback, put him into center and decrease his workload? So I think that's my main concern, is the volatility of this situation, in that you don't know that Gutho can continue to be the player that you knew before last year. Because last year he was still fantastic, obviously leading into that meniscus injury, and he could continue to be that. He could potentially continue to be that. But for a player who relies on big motor, workload, effort plays, just putting miles and kilometers through the legs, now dealing with this, yeah, I'm definitely concerned. And you just don't know, as I said, whether he can ever be that same player again. James, am I on my own here, or are you in a similar boat?
Two other fullbacks that come to mind here, Brien, two fan favourites as well. Matty Bowen, for one, with his recurrent knee issues, and Brett Stewart was the other one that springs to mind as well, both with knees. I guess in Brett Stewart's case, he had recurrent keyhole surgery on that knee and some other pretty serious intervention on that knee that rendered him, not able to perform at his level, later into his career there. So I guess when you hear recurrent knee surgeries, recurrent arthroscopic surgeries, you're getting this flare up of swelling every now and then. It doesn't bode well for, I guess, longevity and prospects at fullback. It doesn't sound like anyway. Obviously, we've got no specific information on Gutho as to why this could be. It could be something completely unrelated, but it doesn't instill a huge amount of confidence there. And I love your tinfoil take on what was going on last year with, well, why Parra looking for a fullback? Maybe there was a bit more to the medical reports there that was sort of leaning towards, well, maybe if we bring in, say, Zach Lomax, like has just happened, maybe he's the fullback in waiting and maybe Gutho moves to a centre position, or maybe moves to 6 and they swap with Dylan Brown there. Maybe, I don't know. There's a few people that sort of rate Dylan Brown might have a bit of fullback in him, even though he's played a lot of his juniors at 6. But it's one to watch for Parra there. I think it's an interesting sort of thing, because recalling late last year when Gutho had the meniscus tear and he had that knee heavily strapped up there, he was almost playing on one leg late last year, wasn't he? Like, they were trying to make the 8 and he was trying to stay on the field, and he was obviously doing the business fantasy-wise because he was still putting up huge points late last year, but he was really playing through, significant knee concerns there, that we know now. One to monitor, I think, Brien. Hey, I think it does make you a little bit apprehensive. I think if you were a fantasy enthusiast and you got him in draft setups, it would make me sort of lean towards maybe looking at a different, younger option with a bit more upside there. I guess fullback's pretty deep, so hopefully you can find someone waivers-wise or run a trade through something, see what you can get there. I think Brien would be my take from a fantasy point of view. Do you agree?
Yeah, 100%. I'd be taking, if you can get decent value for him, I'd be jumping off. I think you hit a really good point, and we'll emphasize it again. Once again, we haven't seen Gutho's scans. We're talking in general terms. I'm not sitting here saying he definitely has osteoarthritis. I mean, there is a very high chance, considering his history and now what he's dealing with. But it could very well be a latent infection that's continuing to give him problems now. That has its own set of horrible side effects and issues that we could talk about. We could do a whole podcast on what these things could be, but just once again, reading the tea leaves of looking at what Gutho's history is. And as I said, the swelling on its own, probably not all that concerning, but when you put the swelling alongside his history, that's where the concern rises.
Yeah, well summarised there, Brian. We'll move on to the Panthers v Tigers game that was out at Bathurst there. Junior Tupou was a foot fracture is what has been reported to date. I don't know any more specifics about that, Brian, so you can elaborate there in a second. And then also Dylan Edwards from this game as well. Leg concern again. I don't have a lot of detail to help you out here, Brian. Can you fill in the gaps for us?
Yeah, so Junior Tupou, the mechanism didn't look like much. And look, I'll admit, I didn't see Benji's post-match presser, but the way I read it, I read the quotes about what he said about Junior Tupou, and I found it really interesting because he kind of said, oh, we think it's fractured, or he said, or at least that's what he thinks. And I don't know whether he was kind of having a crack at Tupou a little bit, sort of being like, oh, he's just come off because he's saying his foot's broken or something like that, or whether he meant he as in like the medical staff or something like that. So I'd have to go back and watch that the press conference to see what he was getting at there. But yeah, the mechanism didn't look like much. Foot fractures, that can be the case though, as we've seen, with guys in recent times. Mitch Moses, a perfect example where he's fractured his foot from little to nothing, and now is going to spend 12 weeks on the sideline. So I think with Junior Tupou, there's a lot of little bones in the feet that aren't ideal to fracture. If he has, you're looking at 6 to 8 weeks minimum, and potentially much longer if it's one of those nasty ones. Dylan Edwards, worth mentioning. About 5 minutes ago, they put a little chip through, and it was like that Nathan, I think the comms said, and it was very much like that Nathan Blacklock kind of, grand final situation where they put the chip through and Dylan Edwards got there like a split second before the guy who chipped and chased did, which was pretty cool. But he kind of then pulled up, he went to sort of support run the next sort of tackle and grabbed at his hamstring. So he came off, he didn't have ice on it. Ivan seemed pretty, blasé about it after the game, so he didn't seem concerned. But as we know with hammies, even a minor strain can still see you miss a week. So it's one where I didn't see anything that super concerned me. And the fact it took till the next tackle for him to notice it, I wonder whether it just cramped up and, he just got a cramp in the hammy and went, okay, yep, I'm going off because we've got the game in hand. Hopefully that's all it was. But yeah, just because it's a hammy, I'm a little bit more on edge.
Yeah, Junior Tupou, just going back to him, Brian, he did weight bear his way off the field. And he did stay on the field for a little bit of time as well. So foot fracture, to my eye, would be a little bit unlikely. I thought it was a bit more high ankle sprainy sort of maybe mechanism there, getting caught up in the tackle. But I guess we'll wait and see on the status there for Junior Tupou. Might be still missing a bit of time regardless. Titans versus Eagles, no injuries to talk about here, Brian. So we're going to go to the Broncos game there that was at Suncorp. So big one for the Raiders. Jamal Fogarty sounds like a bicep tear. So that's really bad news for Jamal and the Raiders there, because I don't think they have a huge amount of depth at the 7 spot. Not that many clubs do, to be fair to the Raiders either. But good news for the Broncos here, Ryan. So I'm going to pump myself up and pump up all the Broncos fans here. So we're looking like Payne Haas, Adam Reynolds, Brien Piakura, and Deine Mariner maybe is all back in next week. So that gets me pretty horny hearing all those big names coming back into the team. So do you think that's probably realistic to expect all them back, Brian?
Yeah, mate, I had most of them. I think I was looking at the casualty ward this week, the Patreon casualty ward, and I had them all kind of around this round 8 to 10 kind of range. Your likes of Payne Haas, I had a bit more of a wide range because, as we mentioned, we didn't really have a whole lot of information as to what, we still don't know what that surgery is, and he's, potentially going to come back next week. So that's one of the better smothers you've seen for such a big player, and especially the way the journos cover the Broncos. They've usually got every little fine detail of what's going on, but I haven't seen any clarification on what's going on with Payne Haas. So that's a really interesting one. But yeah, it's looking like they're all going to be back next week, which for you, mate, that is big for the Bronx. And I think, look, if Penrith didn't exist, I think the Bronx are on a good march, but a good march to meet the Dolphins in the grand final is what I meant there. But they're looking good. Jamal Fogarty with the biceps rupture though, mate, that is such a killer because he was kind of the linchpin in that 6, 7, and 1 position, especially with Jordan Rapana out. They just had so much youth in that, the 6 and the 1, that just to have that Jamal Fogarty there to steer the side around and Yeah, it's going to be a big loss. Unfortunately, the mechanism that they showed on Fox didn't look like much, but I went back because I kind of had a look at it and it just looked like Corey Oates just kind of ran into his bicep in terms of like almost like a cork mechanism. And when I first saw that, I was like, oh, if that's all it is, maybe it is just a biceps cork. And I kind of had a little bit of positivity around it. But then I started hearing word out that no, it like they're because it is, especially that distal biceps around the elbow. It's just one tendon. It's very easy to to identify that via hands-on tests. So if they're kind of the medical staff are like, yeah, we're pretty confident, that kind of made me think, oh yeah. So I went back and had a look, and about I think 8 or 9 minutes to go, he kind of falls off a breakthrough tackle and kind of grips and pulls. And you can see him kind of shake his arm a little bit, and so I think he kind of probably suffered it then. And yeah, I mean the toughness to play on until halftime is crazy. But I did want to talk about, so it's looking like it's a distal rupture. So what we talk about when we talk about distal and proximal in simple terms, proximal is up closer towards the head, distal is down further towards the feet. So the distal tendon, sort of the biceps in around the elbow, it's just effectively a single tendon. Up towards the shoulder, though, which is the proximal tendons, there are a couple of tendons there. And the reason I mention that is because a lot of people were asking me, what are you talking about? How can, because in my post I said sometimes players can play through a biceps rupture if it is up at the proximal end, so near the shoulder. And I just wanted to explain that. So obviously down at the elbow, there's one tendon. If you rupture that tendon, the whole function of that muscle is gone because there's nothing there still attaching it to the elbow. So the figures I like to give my patients, because I have some patients who kind of still want to toss it up. They might not be footy players. They might be, just social sport. And they're like, okay, what am I looking at function loss wise? Can I sort of survive without this? And so a really important movement for function is rotation of the forearm. We call it supination when it goes up towards the sky. You lose about half of your strength in supination, about 30% of elbow flexion. So that's one we all know biceps for, which is, those bicep curls. You lose about 30% of that strength. And you can lose about 15% in grip strength as well, which is those three movements for footy, huge in around tackling, passing, those kind of things. So that's why a distal rupture, sort of down around the elbow, it's very, very hard to play through. There have been a few guys do it in the NFL I saw, but see, a lot of those guys are linemen. They're more your triceps, you're pushing as opposed to you grabbing and pulling. So they kind of got around it a little bit. But yeah, no one in the NRL that I'm aware of has pushed through the distal biceps rupture. The proximal one, though, because there are two tendons that go up into the shoulder, if you tear one, you can still kind of get away with that one that tears off. It's very unlikely to go back up and attach onto its initial point. But what that free end of the tendon does is it kind of almost sits down on the muscle belly and scars into that muscle. And then you've still got that one tendon that's attaching. So usually I say to patients with that one, you usually only lose about 20 to 30% of that forearm rotation up towards the sky. So it's not as bad. And we've had multiple players play through that. Paul Gallen's one, Anthony Watmo's one. There've been many players who've played through that. They come back in about 3 to 6 weeks. But with that distal rupture that Fogarty has, or reports are that he has, you're looking at surgery to reattach and about 3 to 4 months recovery. So most players come back around that 12-week mark. But yeah, that's the reason why you will have seen my tweet sort of talking about some players can come back after the shot, after some biceps ruptures. It's up at the shoulder, but down at the elbow, yeah, it's big trouble.
Yeah, well summarised, Brian. I don't think there's anything else I'd want to add there for little tidbits. Bulldogs v Knights. We've got a few to talk about out of this game there. It seems like the Bulldogs always have a bit of a casualty war, don't they? So the bye comes at a good time for them to hopefully get some troops back and ready to get on the footy field. So Chris Patolo out of this one was an MCL injury. It looked a little bit suspicious for ACL, but we haven't heard any word about whether ACL is involved there or not. So fingers crossed for him on that front. From the Knights, Dane Gagai was ruled out pre-game with a calf injury. They're not expecting an extended amount of time out there, so maybe just this week and back next week. Tom Jenkins was a knee injury, and probably the big one here, Brien, for footy fans and Supercoach enthusiasts alike is Kalyn Ponga with the foot injury. I guess, do you want to rattle off through the initial injuries first, and we can talk more specifically about Ponga at the end?
Yeah, mate, we've got a bit of diving to go with that one. So we'll quickly go through Chris Patolo with the MCL, our good friend of the show, number one ticket holder to the Magic Sponge. Gus Gould tweeted tonight that it's looking like a grade 3 MCL for Patolo. So he'll be facing at least 6 to 8 weeks out, but Gus, and I'm sure he's just copy and pasted this from a message from probably the team doctor, but he said that if the MCL has avulsed from the femur, that surgery to reattach gives more predictable results, which is absolutely right. Apparently, Patolo's had issues with this MCL in the past. So potentially it's, something that's avulsed again. But if surgery is required, it's usually that little bit longer, often around that 10 weeks, but it can be as quick as 6 to 8 weeks if they can manage it conservatively. Tom Jenkins with the knee injury, that looked like a really, really bad cork. The video wasn't great because it was one of those ones that's super frustrating. This is like just diving into my brain. It's where like they had the wide shot as he was running up, and then as they run into each other, it flicks to the close up, like right as they like run into each other. And I'm like sitting there on my phone, like flicking between one frame to the other. And it's just so hard to figure out what went on because you can't it's just really frustrating, but that's just a first world NRL physio problem. But Tom Jenkins, it definitely looked like a cork and he was kind of rubbing above the knee. And I think Adam O'Brien sort of indicated that in the post-match as well. It sounded like a knee clash. So if it's a bad cork, usually you can have guys come back within a week. At most they miss a week just to sort of let it settle down. Dane Gagai with the calf, they think he should be back next week. And then worth mentioning, Tyson Frizzell, they said 60-40 to return next week. So he's obviously looking a bit better, but once again with hammies, they're probably not going to take a risk unless they absolutely have to. Okay. Let's jump into probably the biggest injury for the week, Kalyn Ponga. It's funny, I was sitting here watching like the first half hour of the first half, and then I had to go to Bunnings, and I was sitting there and nothing had happened. I'm like, oh yeah, sweet, we're all good. He did look like he was limping a little bit, but I thought, with the hip pointer, there'd be nothing obvious to that point. With the hip pointer, you're going to see them look a little bit lame, but they still perform all right. So I wasn't too concerned. Anyway, I literally, as I pull into the car park at Bunnings with the kids, my phone just goes bonkers. Ponga's gone off, and I'm just going, oh my God, I was sitting in front of my computer like 10 minutes ago, and now it's just all popping off. So, nothing obvious to work you through my process. I went back and I couldn't find anything obvious on video in terms of when the foot injury occurred. Worth covering off straight away. It's got nothing. Well, very unlikely. I can't see how the foot injury is to do with the hip pointer because the hip pointer is just a cork. Even like compensation wise, in a week, you're very unlikely to get enough compensation to cause they've said ligament injury in the foot potentially, but even if it is a tendon, which we'll talk about in a second, I just can't see how that has built up within a week. So Adam O'Brien said in the post-match presser, effectively he said it's like it's adjacent to a Liz Frank injury. It's a tendon or a ligament that wraps around under the foot. It's not a Liz Frank injury, but it can be related to that. He said it's very rare. So I guess I'm sitting here and going to tell you that there's a lot of little ligaments in around that area of the foot and the ankle. There's quite a few tendons that run through there as well. So the two major ones that run through there are tibialis posterior, which is a muscle that starts up in the calf and runs down that medial or inner side of the ankle and attaches right in around the foot where he was kind of pointing. and there's a spring ligament, which is there as well. And the reason I talk about those two is they're probably the two most commonly injured in that area when you're talking about like in the midfoot arch kind of area, because they both work really hard to help preserve that arch of your foot. So if you look down, you see that the arch of your foot that people might go get orthotics for to hold the arch up. Well, that tibialis posterior and spring ligament do a lot of work to help hold that arch up. So if they're injured, your arch can collapse, and that can cause a lot of pain because the arch is really, really important. It's like the core of your foot. It helps disperse all the forces. So if that's lost, and that's something that they could identify, because that's, you and I were talking off air, there's so many different ligaments and tendons and things in there that would just be near on impossible to diagnose via hands-on tests and be like, oh yeah, it's definitely this, especially if it's rare. Like if it's a rare ligament injury, it's like that's really hard to kind of identify just without any scans. But the Tupou/spring ligament one is, I could see a situation where they could identify that. That's a little bit of a nerd out. I don't mean to bore people too much, but effectively what I want to get at here is that no matter what the injury is, whether it's the Tupou and the spring ligament, whether it's some medial midfoot ligaments, which are midfoot ligaments, the Lisfranc ligament is a midfoot ligament, there could be some damage to the midfoot ligaments just on the inner side of that Lisfranc complex. No matter what it is in that area, it is going to be a minor miracle if he gets away with anything under 6 weeks. That's kind of where I sit at the moment. I just think it could be as long as three to 4 months. And that's kind of why I didn't post any timeframes. And it's not because I had, once again, I just love feedback from the Instagram and Facebook DMs, because I had so many people in my DMs. Well, not so many, but I had like 7 or 8, which is quite a few, especially if they're insulting me, saying like, oh, you're just holding back you've changed, you're holding back your time frames and stuff like that. I just don't like to post stuff when I'm saying it could be 4 to 6 weeks, it could be 3 to 4 months. I try and avoid that if I can, because I just feel like that doesn't really provide a lot of value for anyone. And it's time that I have to put aside to kind of, do up a post and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, this isn't telling people much. Like they already pretty much suspect this and know this. So I don't think that provides a lot of value. So I think it could be anywhere from 1 to 3 months at this stage, but I think it would be, if it comes out that it's minor and he's coming back like next week or the week after, I'll be absolutely flabbergasted, to be honest, because if it's a damage to any of those ligaments or tendons in around that midfoot or that arch, you are very lucky to get away with a minor sprain and very lucky to get away without at least 6 weeks recovery. I think some midfoot sprains you can get away with around 4 weeks, and that's why I said a month, because that's kind of what I'm hoping is best case. But yeah, I like at the moment, I think plan for a multi-week recovery at the very best. I'm definitely trading him out in fantasy and SuperCoach unless we hear anything else. Mate, we try not to get too deep into the nerd chat, but have I missed any possibilities that you can think of, and what are you thinking for Ponga at the moment?
No, I don't think so. I think the obvious one that people would ask me is plantar fascia as well, like just even along that medial arch or insertion, but it would just be reported that way. Like that's a pretty obvious one just to pick up, like in terms of like just observation and a few of the clinical tests you can do physio wise. And for that not to come up just makes me think it's probably not that. So you're probably looking at, somewhere in the medial ligament complex or maybe somewhere in the midfoot complex. It's just so hard to predict, mate. And I guess with those tests that you talked about, a lot of them don't have super good specificity or sensitivity. So you're really reliant on imaging. So we're not really going to know the full picture there with Kalyn Ponga. Probably Tuesday or Wednesday, I would imagine, by the time it's all said and done. But I'd probably have an interim plan to make some moves from your fullback position if you're someone that has Kalyn Ponga, I would say. Moving forward, Brien, Sharks Cows was the only other game there. No injuries out of that one either. So we're just going to give some updates on 3 of the Rabbitohs players who are coming back next week off the bye. No, not next week, sorry. Probably just a little bit of an update on 3 of those players because they've been on the bye this week. So Tevita Tatola with a foot fracture, Ty Munro, collarbone fracture, and then Jai Arrow with the shoulder concern. We talked about him earlier in the year there. Where are things at with Jai Arrow at the moment, Brien? Are we talking surgical route, or is he going to try and get back non-surgically to the footy field?
No, apparently he's flying in his rehab. His words, I think he was interviewed on Triple M. So he's looking to come back this week. So, which is once again about where we kind of had him pegged for, around that sort of 6 to 8 week return. I think there was some confusion when the Rabbitohs put out an injury video, would have been maybe 3 weeks ago or something like that, where they spoke about the 6 to 8 week return. And plenty of people misunderstood that for another 6 to 8 weeks after when that was happening. But they were talking about sort of when it initially happened, which is pretty standard. I think the important thing with Jai Arrow here, and I've had a few patrons kind of discussing about Arrow, he's just not someone who I'd chase. The aggravation risk of him moving forward. Yes, he's avoided surgery for now. That doesn't mean he could go out there, aggravate the shoulder again, and then need immediate surgery. So he's just not someone who I'm super, super high on, even in, a position like front row where there's not a lot going on. And then, just worth mentioning Tevita Tatola. There's another one, super innocuous mechanism. He's got a fifth metatarsal, same fracture as Mitch Moses. He's going to miss 12 weeks. And just interesting, once again, we sat on here and spoke about how, the initial reports of Moses being back in 6 to 8 weeks, and we were a bit surprised and like, whoa, that's pretty quick, accelerated. The Rabbitohs are talking 12 weeks for Tevita Tatola. So, just an interesting perspective on those two different clubs almost having at least a month and potentially 6 weeks in difference between the time frames that they're talking about bringing a guy back, which is, a funny one. And then Ty Munro, he's fractured that collarbone, which just sucks. So he's going to undergo surgery to repair that, but that does decrease his risk of a fracture moving forward.
Very good, Brien. That's a good summary there from the injuries. We're going to rip into the Patreon questions now. So patreon.com/NRL Physio. If you want these questions answered on a weekly and you want to have good chats with Brien and some good nerd chats, some good general life chats, get around him on Patreon as per usual. So question number 1, Brien, is how dangerous is a trip? Do you think it should be an automatic sin bin in NRL games if you see someone get tripped?
Mate, I was thinking about this. The trip has always been I always thought it was an automatic sin bin. But it seems like lately, the last couple of years, it's become not. For me, and I'll probably have people hound me down here, but I feel like a trip is dirtier than it is dangerous. So I'm not saying it's safe by any means, but when you put it on the spectrum of a trip, because someone has obviously asked this question. I'm like, okay, how dangerous is a trip? How can I answer that question? Am I putting on a scale of 0 to 10? What am I doing? I'm like, well, I'll compare it to other dangerous tackles. And I would much rather be tripped than hip dropped or cannonballed or chicken winged, those kind of, because as much as a trip, it is dirty. I feel like it's you're throwing your leg out when you've been beaten and you're kind of tripping the guy. It doesn't happen all that often, but even when it does, we very, very rarely see a significant injury in those situations. I think it's different if the player is being held up and you see, I think there was the one that Cleary did a couple of seasons ago where he kind of did the old Alfie Langer tackle where he tripped the guy and really came down on his knees, almost like a trip / hip drop. That's a bit different. But a lot of these are a guy's beaten, he just throws a foot out and it clips him on the shin. It's just very unlikely to have enough force to cause significant damage. So I don't see it as super dangerous in terms of risk of injury, but I just think it's a dirty thing to do. So should it be an automatic sin bin? I'm very happy for it to be a sin bin because I think it's dirty enough that it probably should be. And it has enough, if you combine that dirtiness with the increased risk of injury that it does have, I think that's fair enough. But I'm also okay with it being a little bit less than, say, a hip drop or something like that. Where do you sit on it, mate? Are you kind of similar?
I think it's an old throw. It's a bit of a throwback, the tripping sin bin send off thing. It used to always historically be a send off in you're talking 70s and 80s and things like that. And that's when footy was you better be able to fight before you can play rugby league because it was a violent game. And I think it was an automatic send off because it had the ability to be used, fairly negatively in a game that was already brutal and already had, a lot of violence in it. So I just don't think you see it very often these days. Like if you're talking like true trips, I can only recall like a handful per year happening. And the ones that do, like you said, are when people get sidestepped and beaten and the leg goes out as a sort of natural sort of instinctive reaction and it doesn't result in big injury. I can live with it either way. I think you just got to do it as a case by case. If someone, is obviously doing it in a dirty way that's intentionally going to cause injury, then of course send them off. But that's just a pretty sort of just call it as you see it type thing, which I think is probably a fair enough thing to go through there. And question number 2, Brian, we're going to talk about Sam Walker. Not looking good for yours truly when I took Sam Walker very high in draft formats this year. But what's the story with him not passing HIA protocols the week just gone? Do you have any more good source on that?
Yeah, I think the main thing to say here is it's not just the Roosters sort of being cautious and Sam Walker's passed through the protocols. He actually didn't pass through the protocols. And what that means, I think it's good for people to know what that actually means. So there's that graduated return. So, low level exercise, higher intensity exercise, contact training, working away. It's all through those stages of the HIA protocol. At those different stages, it's not just you do those each day and you get through it and it's fine. At each stage, as your intensity of exercise and things increase, that can bring on symptoms. So you can be fine at rest. I can be sitting there in my dark room, be fine. And then as soon as I get out in the light and start catching things and brain processing, that can cause me to get headaches and cause me to get dizziness. So that's what's happened to Sam Walker. At some point in those stages, he has returned to a level and he has got symptoms. So when that happens, you have to go back. You have to bring yourself back to the stage that you are symptom free at, stay at that for a little bit longer, and then progress. And that's just like rehab for any injury, really. Is if you get a stage where you're getting really bad symptoms, you bring it back to where you're feeling good, and then you build back up again. So that's what's happened with him. And then, just interesting, I think, good illustration of how each concussion is unique and each concussion situation is unique, because you've got a guy, Sam Walker, it's his second concussion on record. It wasn't super obvious. I think it was deemed category 1, but you didn't look at him at the time and be like, oh, he's been knocked out or anything like that. And here he is, he can't get back in 2 weeks. Whereas James Tedesco, his 10th documented concussion, gets knocked out, absolutely cold, arms go up in the air, and he passes through those protocols within 2 weeks and returns. So it just shows you how, this is why concussions, I just don't like them in terms of predictability, because it's so hard to predict. It's so, my favorite word, it's so volatile.
Well summarised, Brian. I don't have any good stuff to add in there apart from please get healthy, Sam Walker. I really need my halfback in draft to start firing for me. So hopefully he's back on the park sooner rather than later and kicking goals for the Roosters and scoring bulk points for yours truly and a few other people who are fortunate enough to roster him. Last question from Patreon here, Brian. So this is one for the Bronx fans. So good shout out by the Patreon here, really speaking my language. They want to know what's the re-injury risk for Adam Reynolds, and he might be coming back next round. Would it be safer for the Broncos to go another week with him, or is it safe enough for him to play, or will he be close enough to 100% to play?
Yeah, so re-injury risk for Adam Reynolds is just like anyone returning from a hamstring injury. And I think the point is that, like the question says, is it safe enough for him to play if he's 100%? The answer is yes, it is definitely safe enough for him to play if he's 100%. But the issue with hamstrings is that majority of these guys who return are at 100%. And this is the issue we have with hamstrings, not just at an NRL level or a professional sport level. This is at, community level, at whatever level you want to talk, is that a lot of people pass this return to play testing with flying colors. They're doing really, really well. They're not feeling any symptoms, and then they still re-injure themselves at quite a high rate. It's up to 30%. It can be higher. So in that first 2 weeks, the evidence in the NRL tells us he's at about a 10 to 12% risk of re-injuring it. That's even with him passing all the tests. An extra week does help decrease that a little bit, but it's very, very hard to hold a player back when they're ticking all of the boxes. They're doing really well. and you're just like, no, let's just hold you back for another week, even when it comes to a hamstring. So I'll throw to you as a big Bronx fan. What would you prefer, James? Would you prefer Adam Reynolds, and knowing what you know about hamstring strains, would you want him to come back next week with the proviso that 90% of the time he's going to be fine and get through it okay? Or would you rather he wait an extra couple of weeks and roll with Jock Madden instead?
I'd be happy for him to come back, although the Broncos do have the West Tigers next week. Could be a Jock Madden revenge week, so I would like that as a juicy headline if I'm putting my tinfoil hat on there a little bit, Brian, and playing devil's advocate. But I think either way, the Broncos, the way they're set up, they just need someone to play 7 who can kick well and finish sets and put some icing on the cake there. So if Adam Reynolds is 90% there and he can do that, then all well and good. I think the tricky thing is for the Broncos at the moment is they do rely on him quite a lot for those end of set plays, those good kicking options. And he's not going to be that reliable for the rest of the year or probably moving forward. I don't think with his injury history now and his age, factored in as well, Brian. So I think hopefully for the Broncos that Jock Madden comes on and develops and gets a little bit more playing time and a bit more game time, and he can be a reliable option for us, because I think we're probably going to have, other instances through this year where Reynolds may need a week here or there, or may need to get through some soft tissue things or some weekly things depending on how he goes. So I think it's safe for him to come back. Yeah, if he's 100% and he's 90% and they're good to go, then all sweet. But I think the Broncos need to have, or fans as well, need to have that understanding of he's probably fairly unlikely for him to be available every week of the season moving forward. So just don't get your hopes up too high and don't blow the baby out with the bathwater if he misses a week or two here and there. Because I think Jock Madden's a pretty capable replacement. He's probably one of the better backup sevens kicking around the NRL top 30 squads compared to other teams, Brian. So I don't think they're in a too bad situation. A lot of other cavalry's coming back there. So if he can just chip in and do his job and finish off some sets of 6, I think the Broncos are still pretty well placed there with Jock Madden.
Mate, you say that Jock Madden is one of the best backup halves in the comp, but you forget that the Dolphins have one Anthony Milford as their backup half. So, I know you might not be jealous about me for a lot of things, but surely there's some jealousy there, having the great man just there to back up our halves if anyone goes down.
Oh, look, of course, nostalgia. I would love to have Anthony Milford back in the Broncos fold there. I think, especially now that the Broncos aren't being sponsored on the weekly by McDonald's, I think that would only bode well for his output on the footy field, Brian. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I would. I think, I don't know how many Maccas there are in Redcliffe these days, mate, but it's looking like there's still quite a few there. So, yeah, I'm more than happy if there's any Raiders officials listening. I'm more than happy if the Raiders want to get him down there to replace Jamal Fogarty. Go for it. But look, let's go straight into Supercoach Corner. Mate, you're killing it. You are on a charge. I love it. Hit me with your score. Get us. I want to hear your plans this week because you're on a run. So I might just have to get in behind you and follow your moves.
I got big on Captain Nico this week, Brian. So I think he covered up a lot of other blushes in other spots and situations. The best of those situations, Brian, I would say was I benched the 2 Raiders players in favour of playing Tommy Talau. And I thought, against the Titans, left winger, we're going to be in the money. It must have been every other player scored pretty good points there, apart from Tommy Talau. So I was pretty let down by
Him
that.
and Garrick, actually. Garrick was the other one too.
Yeah, I know. It was a tough pill to swallow, that one. Anyway, so my week would have looked a little bit better there. I was going to loop Turbo, but then when Max King got named, I thought, no, I'm going to play it safe and just stick the captain on Nico. So luckily, Max King came back in and probably lent me towards keeping the captaincy on Nico. So that was good. So obviously, he scored bulk fantasy points this week, which got my score up to 1142. So last week, I took Cole Iro in at centre wing and also Angus Crichton. I've got about 210 in the bank with those 2 guys. So they were both good trades. I think Cole Iro might even be like a 4th centre wing option moving forward. Brian, he scored reasonably well without many attacking stats today there. So I think if you're someone that has Iro in your lineups, you could almost rely on him for fairly decent output there if he keeps getting the centre wing spot. Doesn't have heaps of security, but I think if he gets named, I think you almost have to roll him out, to be honest, in your 3rd or 4th spot there. 2 trades next week. I guess the Ponga trade is the obvious one, isn't it? I think that's going to be everyone's trade out this week who owns him. Reece Walsh looks like the best of the bunch there. I think you have to take a little bit of, I guess, candy off the top there because he's probably not going to be goal kicking anymore, and he has been hitting them pretty well. So you're probably going to miss a little bit of that upside there, but he's looking pretty good based on the weeks gone by. The Broncos are getting some players back. He's one of those guys that in a 10-minute spurt can put on 2 or 3 tries. So you just have to, look at his score at halftime. And if he's on 10, then you go, well, he might score 100 and a half. And oftentimes he has done that. So he's got to enjoy it, embrace it. And if in doubt, Brien, always go hot. That is the Magic Sponge mantra. We're going to live by that. We're going to die by that. So don't worry about too many other options. If you're thinking, who do I get there? Reece Walsh is the one. I need to get more juice out of centre wing. So I don't know which way I'm going to go here because there's a few blokes on the slide. I'm looking at Jermaine Asako. I'm looking at Greg Marzu. Ruben Garrick is another one as well. I also really like Jacob Carraz and Bronson Zeri, but I think I'm going to do that next week. So this week, the other centre wing option I might even go to might even just be Chevy Stewart because he's going to goal kick. He's going to play fullback. Hopefully Ricky sticks there. He had a tough game the other night, but honestly, Brien, there was more good than bad that I saw out of Chevy Stewart there. I think he had a couple of errors, but man, he tried his ass off and he just kept fronting up. He kept taking tough carries. They were getting dusted. He could have thrown the tail in, but there was some really good signs there. I thought he was really impressive, albeit in not his best game there. Just the like the innate stuff there, like the intangible things there looked really good. So I think he's a really good option at centre wing that I might even take Taylor May down to save a bit of cash. He's bottom priced, but he is goal kicking. He seems like he's got a bit more security there before Jordan Rapana comes back. So I may well not juice up centre wing this week, and I might look at doing that moving forward because I might just try to squeeze another week before Jacob Carraz definitely comes into my team when the Bulldogs are off bye. And I think Bronson Zeri's actually looked better than I expected. I think you've got to give credit where it's due there. He's not that expensive, but then, Asako and Mizu might be on the fall a little bit further there. So I'm looking at those two guys who've historically been guns coming in soon because I need some more points there. I think Lomax is a little bit out of reach for me at the present. I just didn't get on there in time. So I'm looking at alternative options in that sort of realm there. So that's why I lean at the moment. The only other one, which is a smoky, is if Sam Walker falls out of favour and he's not going to be playing 7 and they're going to roll Sandon Smith and also Luke Keary, I think Joe Suaalii with the goal kicking boots is probably not a bad option now. He's in like low 500s. We've seen in the past there he can just score a few meat pies. He hasn't got a try yet this year that I can remember anyway. And he's been kicking pretty well. So he might be one to even look at there who covers around 13 buy as well as an option. So he's the other one I've got in the back of my mind. But you're looking at Trent Robinson shenanigans there to try and make a decision. So I want to put that off a week perhaps. So that's the initial thoughts there, Brien. I guess a lot of sort of chat from me. How did you go this week? And I guess plans last week and moving forward, what are they?
No, mate, I'm all about your chats because I'm kind of on a similar wavelength. So I always love that when we seem to be on a bit of a charge after a slow start to the season. So I was 1,097. My trades were Angus Crichton and Iro in for Burbo and Bostock. Bostock is a killer. I'm filthy, more filthy than anyone for trading him out because obviously being the Finns, I love seeing him score tries, but it was good either way to see him score tries and the Finns get a big win. Ponga to Walsh, look, probably one of the most obvious trades of all time, I think. I did the maths. Jay Schubert puts out some great tweets to sort of tell us what prices are going to be. It'll probably be about 260K you'll net, and that 1 point game from his broken face game will drop out of his rolling average this week, which is just, like perfect timing. So, yeah, I'm thinking Ponga to Walsh, just lock that in. I do want to mention, though, like that is such a good trade, and I think if it wasn't such a good trade, and if you're not sold on Walsh for whatever reason, like looking at the fullback options, you got Chance, who's killing it, and he's got the Titans, then the Knights. So that's a pretty good run, especially the Knights potentially without Ponga. Drinkwater, look, they've got Penrith next week, but then they've got Dolphins, Titans, Souths, and Tigers 4 weeks in a row. That's a dream run. And Paps has South, Titans, Sharks, Para. 4 sides who aren't known for their defensive prowess. So, like those gun options, you could seriously go anyway because I think Ponga and Walsh is probably going to be the most popular one. But there are so many different options you can do there. And then, look, I'm going to throw it in. It might be a bit of homerism, but you could even go full rogue. You could go down to Chevy Stewart, but you could also go full rogue and go down to Trey Fuller. Because, like he looked really good. He'll be in there for at least 4 weeks, but I reckon potentially longer with the way that, Hammer plays his game. They're probably going to want to be a bit careful with that. So yeah, you could go down there. You obviously can wait a week for that as well, but yeah, he's an option. But look, Walsh at 620K, their upcoming draw is Tigers, Roosters, Para, Manly, Titans. Look, he and Ponga were our big winner calls from last year, so I'm pretty happy. Like getting on them when they were lower price and just riding them is what we were pretty shit. I think like most people otherwise, but those two decisions really helped both of us. And then second trade, I'm the same as you. I want a gun centre wing with high ceiling. For me, I think if Cleary's back, I'm not going to jump straight on Cleary. So I wouldn't mind going to like a Isaac Tungo or a To'o potentially. To'o has not been great this year. I was looking at his scores. So I was like, but then, yeah, Tungo is going to drop down, I think, below 700K for this week, and that's pretty tasty for a guy. They've got Cowboys, Souths, and Dogs the next 3 weeks, which I think is a pretty good 3-week run. Tungo won't have Origin to worry about either, so you've got that as well. So, yeah, that's looking pretty good. Garrick's the other tasty option. Look, he should be 610,000. They've got Eels, Raiders, Dolphins. But they've also, I think I looked ahead, then they've got like Broncos, Storm and Panthers or something like that. So that's a pretty tough run heading into Origin. He might be someone who I just wait till after that stretch. And I'm like you, man. Like I put in the notes, lucky Kiraz is on bye because otherwise he would absolutely be the one. Like he's back on that wing and just absolutely killing it. I think he looks like he's back sort of past that, the back injury that he had. So that's, like he's definitely going to be coming into my team the week after, I think. And then the other options, like I still do have a couple of boosts there. Like I'm going to have 3 Bulldogs front rowers this week, which I'll have to take an AE if I don't trade, which as I've said, I'm not planning to at the moment. The other options at front row, the only one I can think of at the moment is going up to like an Aden Fanua Blake. But like Max King's going well, like they're all doing well and making money. So I'm just really hesitant to trade one of them out at this point in time. And I think surely Joey Lussick gets dropped next week for hands. And that's the other one who I could potentially go up to. But yeah, mate, I think an interesting one. I wouldn't mind getting your take on it because I know we spoke about it briefly off air, but just your theory around Trey Fuller and interchanges and how we need to get guys like that into the game, because I think he's the perfect example of someone who, these are the guys who are around in Cup, and the situations played exactly to his favour the other night. A hot game in Darwin against a bigger side who probably struggled a little bit in those conditions, and he just lit it up. But these are the guys we want in our game. Hey,
I couldn't agree more, Brian. I think when you speak to rugby league fans, when you talk to people that are in and around the game, what everyone says is, how good is it when you see the Trey Fullers? How good is it when you see the Reece Walters? How good is it Ryan Pappenhausen's? It's all these like smaller, electric footwork, speed, ball paying, skill, just stuff that you can't do and you just can't see on a daily. I always wondered, and this is probably just a little bit of a rant that I like to go on with people, if you just drop the interchange a little bit to somehow keep guys like this relevant or more relevant than they currently are, because I think what you see more and more across the NRL is it's a big players game. Like look at Tom Trbojevic at fullback, look at Latrell at fullback, even some of the smaller guys like Kalyn Ponga is still a big guy. Like he's not a small human being. And he's one of the smaller fullbacks, kicking around, I suppose you could say as well. I really like seeing the short kings in the game as a fellow short king, if you know what I mean. I think we just need to find a way of somehow keeping the brand relevant for these type of players, because I've seen with, different codes and other codes, once players get bigger, stronger, faster, just the smaller player just loses out there a little bit, where I think rugby league's always been special in celebrating the smaller players and really embracing the smaller ones. You're looking at like all the halves from eras gone by. Like Alfie's a great example, just such a small player, but boy, oh boy, on his day, Bowen, Thurston, these guys that were always pegged as too small to play elite level rugby league that get in, get their chance and rip and tear. Billy Slater was one that was like, pegged as a jockey back in the day. You know, these guys, I think we need to look at ways of keeping them in the game because the Trey Fullers, they're good to watch, Brien. Like I'm all for like someone like him getting a go at fullback there. Even we joke about Cody Nikorima, but mate, Cody's box office to watch, and he's made a great career out of rugby league. You know, defending in the front line primarily as well, to his credit. So I think keeping smaller guys in the game is good for footy. It's a vibey rugby league thing having these sort of electric players that can light up a game like that. So how we do that, I don't know. I think the interchange has got something to do with it. But I hope we can sort of find a way of keeping these guys in and keeping them relevant because I love it. I live and breathe it. Do you froth it as well, Brien?
Mate, I'm all about it. I think like I hear a lot of people when that argument comes about, they talk about, you know, and you've just named them, right? Like Alfie Langer, JT, Matty Bowen, you know, all these guys who did make it, right? They did make it. But like the point I always talk about is for every one of those guys, like how many guys, especially us two as like guys who love Queensland Cup, how many guys could you point to in Queensland Cup who just didn't quite make it, right? Those, as you said, those short kings, those little guys who were just excitement packages in Q Cup. And you just love watching. It might not even be Q Cup. You might go down and watch them at your local, you know, on the weekends. And just those littler guys who just don't make it. And there's so many guys. And I think I love, you know, what forwards do for our game. And I will never disrespect the toughness and the hardness of what it takes to run into a brick wall all weekend, every weekend. But there are a lot of forwards who arguably talent-wise, you know, probably had less talent than some of these littler guys, but they get 100, 200 games because their body shape and how they're built fits NRL. You know, it fits what they're looking for in players. And I just think exactly what you're saying is to the point. If you can just get that balance a little bit more, so you guys like your Trey Fullers, well, guys even, you know, lesser than Trey Fuller who just don't quite make it because their body size isn't quite suited for it. Yeah, I like, because as you say, they're just so good to watch.
Yeah, mate, I'm all about it. Like, I think one of the better stories that I can't remember who was retelling it, but I think he was one of the forwards, and he said Alfie Langer would just chirp him all day and just be like, "I'll get you later. I'll get you later." Every time we'd run past him, every time he'd kick chase, he'd get whacked a few times, but Alfie would always be like, "Mate, I'll get you later. Don't worry." And then, no doubt, towards the end of the game, Alfie would always find a way to rip a tear. And I think you always, when you reflect on who your favourite players are, I think there's always an affinity to the smaller player, the exciting player, the flashy player. It's kind of a little bit why, and I know Joey wasn't a small halfback by any stretch, but it's why Joey gets spoken about in GOAT conversation more so than even Cam Smith, because he just had that extra level of skill and that extra level of flair that a Cam Smith doesn't, even though, let's be clear, Brien, that Cam Smith is undoubtedly the GOAT for all intents and purposes. Don't even bring Joey into the conversation with me or I'll cowed punch you. But I think there's still that element of, with his skill, with his position that he played, there's still a perception of, well, he was smaller than a forward. He had more skill. There was more flair there. He was better to watch. He was more enjoyed by the masses, I suppose, as well.
Completely agree, mate. Completely agree. All right, that is a wrap for this week. If you like the pod, give us a review, recommend to a friend, like us on YouTube now. Head on over to patreon.com/NRL Physio. But otherwise, yeah, another week down, another week closer to Magic Round, James. How good. I'm still excited. I got my hat delivered the other day. That is a 2010 Gympie Devils Premiership hat. So I will be rocking the living hell out of that come Magic Round. I hope you're excited, mate. We're going to talk about it every week for the next like 6 weeks, however long it is, still Magic Round, but I don't even care because I'm so excited. Have a good week, mate.
Will do, mate. It's keeping my spirits high in anticipation for Magic Round. It doesn't feel like very far away, so it's going to come quickly. And my God, I cannot wait. I can't wait.
Awesome, guys. And as always, up the mighty, mighty Redcliffe Dolphins.